By supporting my channel through patreon.com, you are aiding in the progress and production of these videos. You are also helping me raise the funds to launch official archaeological excavations throughout North America to uncover more true Hebrew artifacts and remains in this land. You will also see exclusive content that you will find nowhere else.
Shalom, Mubaraka, Mispaka, peace and blessings, family. We are going to look at the Babylonian Chronicles. It's just like looking at the scriptures of another nation. We're going to go into their books and we're going to see and examine exactly how these people describe their lands. And we're going to see that they describe their lands identical to the Americas, just like the scriptures that we have in our Bibles describe the land identical to the Americas. We know that according to scripture, Babylon has willow trees. In Iraq, there are no willow trees. However, there's a type of willow tree that grows in Asia, mostly China, that they call Willow Babylonica. And they only grow in Iraq as an ornament tree that they brought from China. There is no willows naturally growing in Iraq, but they grow wild in Quebec of Canada. We also know according to scripture that Babylon is north of Israel. And, obviously according to the Middle East, Babylon is not the north country. It's not the land of the north. Babylon is all the way to the farthest east. Also, scripture tells us that Babylon has islands.
There is one island in the Persian Gulf that they say ancient Babylonians did actually inhabit. However, this island has very little biodiversity, so the only animals that you can find there are seabirds and sea animals. The actual island itself has no wild beasts, as mentioned in Isaiah 13, so no wild animals live on the island, which means it doesn't fit the scripture.
So there's three things in scripture that basically disqualify and debunk Babylon from being in the Middle East. But let's look at Babylon's own writing according to things that Babylonian scribes wrote down themselves. We're going to look in the Babylonian Chronicles. So here we go. I'm going to rank all the pieces of evidence that I have from the weakest arguments to the strongest arguments. So I'm going to show you guys the weakest bits of information first. Then we're going to build up into the strongest bits of information to prove to you guys that the Babylonian Chronicles describe an American landscape. So stick to the end of this video where I show you undeniable proof. But let's look at the first piece of evidence. We will go to the fall of Nineveh Chronicle. We're going to go to paragraph 3, line 1. It says, in the month Abu, the king of Akkad and his army went upstream to Mani. So there's a place upstream the Euphrates called Mani in the land of Akkad. If you're familiar with my migration series part 2, you will see that I said that Akkad is in the whole area of basically the New England area, all the way from Maine to New Brunswick, maybe even New York area, all the way up from there. Now, the reason why is because that area today is even called Acadia or Acadia. They get this name from the original Indians who lived there. They still called the land Akkadi, right? And it means a fruitful land. And Akkad in Hebrew comes from the Hebrew word ahad or azah, which means strength, right? Strength as in fruitfulness. So there's a correlation. There's a state in Akkad or Acadia today called Maine. Nobody knows where the state got its name from. They say Maine is called Maine because it's the main land. That's not really a fact. They don't know where Maine got its name from. It could have been a Native American word that they called it before the Europeans called it Maine. And it could be that this word Mane is pronounced Maine. Quite frankly, when you go upstream the Euphrates River, you'll get to the St. Lawrence River. Go upstream to St. Lawrence, you'll get to Maine. So I find that to be strong evidence, but it's my weakest bit of evidence that I have. So let's upgrade it. Let's get it a little bit hotter. Let's turn up the heat. Let's show you guys some more convincing evidence, shall we? We're gonna go to the Dynastic Chronicle, right? The Dynastic Chronicle. In column 5, line 1, we see the word sea land. The word sea land was translated from a word that may just mean island. Now let's continue to read. It says, the knight, resident of the sea land, Simbar Sehu, son of Irabu Singh. Line 8. 3 kings of the dynasty of the sea land ruled for 23 years. On line C5, it says, the dynasty of Chaldea was terminated. Its kingship was transferred to the sea land. So that shows you right there that Chaldea, which is Babylon, is a different entity from the sea land. So that gives more power to the opinion or the assumption that the sea land is actually an island. Because if this Babylonian chronicle is mentioning an island, then that would automatically prove it not to be in the Middle East.
Also, the small island in the Persian Gulf known as Failaka Island was way too small to have any political authority over actual Babylon.
The sea land would have to be an island in the St. Lawrence Bay, which there are several of them. And it says, the sea land, Araba Marduk ruled for so-and-so years. And it said, 1 king of the dynasty of the sea land ruled for so-and-so years. The dynasty of the sea land was terminated. Its kingship was transferred to Chaldea. So it's a separate place, a separate entity from Chaldea. When we go to the Suma Ukin Chronicle, line 13, it says, Nabubel Simati, governor of the sea land. So the sea land had its own governor, which means it's a separate entity from the mainland of Chaldea, which probably means it's an island. We don't know for a fact that the sea land is an island. You know, it's either a coast or an island. But if it is a coast, why would it be a different political entity from the mainland? However, in these Babylonian chronicles, we can clearly see that whatever this sea land is, it has a separate political entity from the mainland of Chaldea. So that should show you right there that this is definitely an island. I actually think that sea land is just a translation of a word that literally means island, but the translators can't put island online because that would basically destroy what they're trying to do, the hoax that they're trying to conjure up, right? So that's my second weakest piece of evidence. Let's turn up the heat and let's look at something a bit more strong. Let's go to the Nabonidus Chronicle. Nabonidus Chronicle, line 11 says, the 3rd year, the month, Abu, the ominous mountains. There's a lot of lacunas in these texts. A lacuna is basically a broken piece of the tablet that we cannot read. So there's going to be spaces in between. So just understand that. The 3rd year, the month Abu, the ominous mountains, orchards, all of fruit, from within them to Babylon, became ill, but recuperated. In the month Kislevu, the king mustered his army, and to Nebuchadnezzar of Amorites, he encamped against Edom. There was no lacuna in between of Amorites and he encamped against Edom. When the army went to Amorites, they encamped against Edom during the same time they went to Amorites. So what is Amorites? When you look at the Middle East and you try to find the land of Amorites, it's going to give you an area just south of Turkey. However, Edom is nowhere near that. Edom is all the way at the south of the Levant, right? So you're gonna show me a place that's all the way in the north of the Levant for the land of Amaru. What is Amaru? Amaru is the land of the Amorites, and the ominous mountains is the mountains of the Amorites. And even in the Bible, we can see that the mountains of the Amorites bordered the land of Edom, which makes sense. And it doesn't contradict the Bible, but it does contradict the Middle Eastern point of view, because there is no land of the Amorites near Edom in the Levant, because we have the land of the Amorites all the way north by Turkey instead of south by Edom. So the Middle Eastern model just is simply false. That doesn't add up one bit. That's a clear contradiction from what we see in the Middle East. The other two that I showed you is questionable, but this is a clear contradiction from what they show us in the Middle East. Now let's turn up the heat and let's look at something that's even more convincing. Let's go to the early years of Nebuchadnezzar Chronicle. In line 11 it says, in the 7th year, the month Kislevu, the king of Akkad mustered his troops and marched to the Hatti land. The king of Akkad is Nebuchadnezzar, and he marched to the Hatti land, meaning the land of the Hittites. And the Babylonians called all of Canaan the land of the Hittites, right? But what did they do in the land of the Hittites? In line 12, it then goes on to say, and besieged the city of Judah. So that's Jerusalem. And on the 2nd day of the month of Adaru, he seized the city and captured the king. The king is Jehoiakim. So we see a parallel between this cuneiform Babylonian tablet and what we see in our very own scriptures. There's a parallel in history. So this is proving our scripture with another witness from the Babylonians' perspective. So Nebuchadnezzar went to Jerusalem and captured our king, brought Jehoiakim to Babylon, right? And we read about that in our scriptures. But here's the thing though. It says that he captured Jerusalem in the Hatti land, the land of the Hittites. I mean, it makes sense even in the biblical standpoint, because Jerusalem is shared by the territory of Benjamin. And we know before Benjamin became a territory, it was originally the land of the Hittites, because one of the cities in the land of Benjamin, Bethel or Luz, was originally a Hittite city. So with that being said, Jerusalem, according to a biblical standpoint, would have been in the land of both the Hittites and the Jebusites. So it would be reasonable for the king of Babylon from Akkad to call Jerusalem the city of Judah within the land of Hatti, or the Hatti land. Now, this is the contradiction. The contradiction is, if you Google it and you try to research it on your own, you'll see that they call Turkey the land of the Hittites. So you're telling me that Nebuchadnezzar walked to Turkey and captured Jerusalem? Well, clearly that doesn't make any sense. It literally says he went to the land of the Hittites to capture Jerusalem. Now let's turn up the heat even more to something that we simply cannot deny. Let's go to the early Kings Chronicles. Early Kings Chronicles. And let's start off reading from the very first lines. Sargon, king of Akkad. Akkad is the same thing as Akkad. Sargon, king of Akkad, We know that the Babylonians called Nimrod Sargon. Sargon is Nimrod. Sargon, king of Akkad, came to power during the reign of the fertility goddess, and he had neither rival nor equal. His splendor over the lands, it diffused. He crossed the sea in the east. In the 11th year he conquered the western land to its furthest point. He brought it under one authority. He set up his statues there and ferried the west's booties across on barges. He stationed his court officials at intervals of 5 double hours and ruled in unity the tribes of the lands. So this is what the early Kings Chronicles says about Nimrod. And it says one thing for sure, that he was the king of Akkad. That's the first thing. He came from Akkad, or Accadia, right? We already talked about that's the area from northern New York all the way to New Brunswick and Maine. But it says that he crossed the sea in the east. So he had to cross the sea to get to Babylon, right? Because we know that Nimrod built the Tower of Babel in Babylon. So he had to come from Akkad to go to Babylon, right? But it says that he conquered the lands of the west to his farthest point. He went all the way to the western edge of Quebec, and he conquered all those peoples and brought them under his rule. Remember, Nimrod was a mighty hunter, and in Jasher, Nimrod is described as a warrior, conquering a lot of people. But let's pay attention to the part that said he crossed the sea in the east. The sea would be that bay of the St. Lawrence River. You would have to cross that sea to get to Quebec, where he built the Tower of Babel. In the Middle East, there is no sea that you have to cross to get from Akkad to Babel at all. If you wanted to come from Iran to Babel, you would have to cross the Persian Gulf. But he didn't come from Iran. He came from Akkad. He was called Sargon, king of Akkad, not Sargon, king of Iran. Also, look what it says in line 6. And ferry the west's booty across on barges. Meaning Sargon went from Akkad to the west, which is Babylon, and conquered those peoples, took spoil from those peoples, and sent that spoil across the sea on ferries back to Akkad. Remember, there is absolutely no sea in between Akkad and Babel in the Middle East, but in America there is. And I just want you guys to know this. All these tablets and all these chronicles were indeed taken from America, just like the scriptures that we read every day were taken from America. Remember, these tablets were actually discovered in unknown excavations. Understand that these are some of the most important tablets ever found in history. It gives us key understandings to ancient civilizations. There's no way these excavations that they found these tablets are truly unknown. It's not unknown. They know everything about where they get their tablets from. It's just classified information. So you don't know, you're not gonna know where they found it because they're not gonna let you in on that information. But we know that they got it from North America. It's simple. Perhaps even New Brunswick or Canada, a place around that area. Now I want to show you guys another of the Babylonian Chronicles, and this specific Babylonian Chronicle is basically called the Babylonian Map of the World. And it shows you a map of the world on this chronicle, on this tablet. And I find it very interesting because this does not look like a map of the world. And I think that's a deceptive name for this tablet. According to scholars, this is all the known world to Babylon. which is simply false, because Babylon's empire stretched across, apparently, according to what they tell us, from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And their territory that they known of was not perfectly round at all. It was a irregular shape, and it was not surrounded by a circular bitter river as what it says on this map. And what's very interesting about it is in the middle of it there's something that says Babylon, and there are a lot of circles inside of this place, and it has certain cities. I will read the names of the cities that's mentioned in this circle in a clockwise direction. In the first circle, we see the city of Ur. In the second, we see Assur. Right there, already, we can see that this is false. They have Assur to the east. But we know that Babylon knew that Assur or Assyria was toward the west, well, northwest specifically. Then, going down in a clockwise direction, we have a city called Dur. Then we have Susa, which is the Persian capital, which again is not south, but would actually be northeast if it were in the Middle East. Then we see the city of Uru. And finally, we see the city of Haba. Now, underneath Ur, we have the word Urartu. Urartu is in Turkey, according to the Middle Eastern map, but they have it towards the east, which is a complete contradiction. Really, it's telling you that all these nations came out of Babylon. This is why we see these triangles coming out of this circle. These triangles are showing you regions. It says in every triangle, regions, regions, regions. In every triangle, it translates to regions. However, one of those triangles says something very, very, very interesting. And I want to point this out, that one of those triangles says something very interesting. It says, Great Wall, 6 leagues in between, where the sun is not seen. Great Wall, 6 leagues in between, where the sun is not seen. 6 leagues is equivalent to 20 miles long. It says there is a 20-mile wide wall that's so big that when you're standing on the side of it, the sun cannot be seen. Notice it doesn't say 6 leagues long. It says 6 leagues in between, which means the width of this wall, not the length of this wall, the width of this wall is 6 leagues, which is 20 miles. I'm not a genius or anything, but if you got a wall that's 20 miles wide, it's either not a wall or it's the Tower of Babel that fell to the ground. Let's look at the Lewis Babel Ecological Reserve. Now, in the Lewis Babel Ecological Reserve, we see something very, very similar to what we saw on the map. We see that there is a ring around a circular island, and that ring is a river, right? Just like on that map said, a bitter river. And we also see that there is a sliver of water that comes into the island, right? And there's also a sliver of water that goes into the island on the map. Sure, the sliver of water looks way different, but it's there nonetheless. However, if we look back at the map that's written on this tablet, there is a horizontal and a vertical line, both in the middle and at the bottom of the circle. And we don't really know what those are there for. However, the one at the bottom says swamp land. We see that pretty much the whole island is now full of swamps. But that's because Yah had sent a flood after the fall of Babylon to flood out this entire area. So yes, it's full of pools and swamps and all this other stuff. But originally, during the time of the rulership of Babylon, there was a swamp at the southern part, and in the middle, going vertically from north to south, there was some sort of civilization. It looks like maybe somebody was living there. Maybe there was a road of some sort. We don't know. It doesn't identify it. Also, in the map that we see in the Chronicle, there is something that contradicts the Lewis Babel Ecological Reserve. There is a mountain all the way to the north, but in the Lewis Babel Ecological Reserve, there is a mountain in the middle. This contradicts it clearly because, you know, why would they put it at the top instead of in the middle? Let's look back at the Lewis Babel Ecological Reserve. As we can see, there is a huge mountainous structure going northeast of the island. And this mountainous structure is 20 miles wide, exactly 6 leagues. Not only that, but this mountain is also 60 miles long, which is just enough to reach the top of the atmosphere. So this may just be the fallen remains of the Tower of Babel.
However, this may only be 2/3 of the tower, because according to the book of Jasher, 1/3 of the tower was actually sucked into the earth. And that also makes sense because this island is said to be a meteor impact, which the scientists may draw that conclusion because of how deep the lake is. And the lake would be extremely deep if the tower was sucked into the ground. The entire tower could not have fallen to the ground because the bottom of the tower does not meet the island at all.
But the only problem is the arrow that says a huge wall is pointing more north than it should be pointing. It should be pointing more east than it's pointing north. However, I'm assuming the person who made this ancient map probably doesn't have the perfect geographical understanding of the area, so he may have made some minor mistakes. According to Wikipedia article, the front side of this tablet seems to describe part of the creation of the world by the patron god of Babylon, who divided the primeval ocean and thus created land and sea. So basically, the first thing it talks about is the creation of the world, okay? On the last 2 lines on the front side basically refer to 3 legendary heroes. Utanpism, which is the hero of the flood, which would be their version of Noah. Then it talks about Sargon, the ruler of Akkad, which would be their version of Nimrod. And then it talks about King Berhasanda, the opponent of Nimrod, or the opponent of Sargon. So it talks about Sargon, it talks about the flood, but the main thing is it talks about Sargon. Why would this talk about Sargon in end? It just talks about Sargon in end, and then it talks about the opponent of Sargon, which is probably Yah, and then it ends. So the enemy of Sargon, it talks about him, and then the text literally ends. And and then on the back you see this map of something that appears to be an island, which just so happens to be in Quebec and fit the same mathematical distances that we see in the book of Jasher. Click this link in the top right to watch this video where I prove that the Lewis Babel Ecological Reserve is, in fact, with 100% undeniable proof, the ruins of the Tower of Babel. So we clearly see this on this map, that this is a depiction of the ruins of the Tower of Babel in Quebec. And it talks about Sargon. Who is Sargon? Nimrod, which proves more that this is the tower. I just want you guys to know that they lie and tell us that this tower is named after somebody called Lewis Babel. But that's a lie. That's 100% a lie. Lewis Babel is a code name that the government put on that. And that code name literally means famous warrior of Babel. We know that Nimrod was a famous warrior. Also, if you look up the definition of Lewis, it tells you Lewis means famous warrior. And it's basically just telling you that this area here is called famous warrior of Babel. They put it in our face because that's the most obvious place to hide things. Even when you look at the gematria adds up. Look at the gematria on the screen. It adds up.